Hello guys, welcome back to another video, and today I have something pretty exciting for all of you. It is going to be my thoughts on the upcoming July 2024 balance patch. So, if you haven't heard already, there is an upcoming balance patch. It is the first balance patch of the Covert Operations expansion cycle, and I think this is something that we've all been waiting for with a great amount of anticipation, because man, are there some broken cards in the game right now that we have all seen way too much of. So, there's going to be a series of nerfs, and I don't think there's going to be too many surprises there, but there will also be a series of buffs, and I will go over all of them, give my thoughts, how they will affect you and the decks you play, or the decks you play against. And all of this is going to be coming out actually in probably about 24 hours of me recording this. They gave the announcement a day before the expansion, or before the patch drops on June 9th. So, very short notice, but I'm going to try to get the video up as soon as possible, so let's roll the intro and get into the changes.
What a performance there by J-King.
J-King, full plot armor.
J-King is pushing himself into the ranks of the legend.
J-King is our world champion! J-King 7! What? The back-to-back Cards world champion!
Alrighty, so as with all balance patches, these will be sorted into nerfs first by nation, and then we will get into the buffs. So the first, the first nation we have here, of course, is always Britain, and the Shark Mark III is getting nerfed. And this one, I don't think comes as a huge shock to anybody. This was by far the strongest British card released in this expansion. This card almost single-handedly made air. The playable, again, I don't know if I'd say tier 1. I definitely have some thoughts on air's placement in the meta. However, if a bunch of other stuff is being nerfed, it's probably a good idea to nerf air as well, and Shark is definitely the card in air that most needs the nerf. So previously it was deal damage to target enemy equal to the number of friendly air units you have, including this one. So if you have 2 other air units, you play Shark, it's a 2-cost 1/2 bomber deployment to deal 3 damage, and that can be to a unit, or it could be to the HQ. Or you could just play it on its own, and it's a 2-cost 1/2, deal 1 damage to HQ or to a unit. So it's basically like Albacore without the pin if you have no other units. But if you have any other air units, it starts getting real good real fast, and you can stack multiple of them. You can get additional Sharks off of Sea Embargo, so even though it's a special, you usually see 3 or 4 Sharks against Brit Air anyways. So yeah, this card was absolutely insane, and it's been changed to deal damage to target enemy equal to other friendly air units. So it doesn't count itself anymore, so that's a 1 reduction in the damage it deals 100% of the time you play it. Now, is this still going to see play? Probably. Because if you have 2 other air units on the board, this is still just a 2-cost Kitty Hawk in the form of a bomber, which is probably good enough to see play, and you're frequently going to have 2 bombers. Sometimes you're gonna 2 other air units. Sometimes you're gonna have 3 other air units. Like a non-insignificant amount of the time, you're gonna have 3 other air units, so this is dealing 3 damage, and that's really good. It does make this substantially weaker, though. This is a huge nerf, but what I like about this is it's a huge nerf, but to a card that is probably going to see play. Like, if Brit Air is seen play, you will be running Shark in the deck anyways. This doesn't change that. And even if they cut Shark, you'd still see Shark off of Sea Embargo as often the best choice a lot of the time anyways. So, this is not going to drastically reduce the rate at which Shark is played in Brit Air, but the question is Brit Air still going to see play? And that's, I think, harder to say, because I think Brit Air, especially on a tournament level, was just a really, really bad deck previous to this balance patch. And this balance patch is hitting a lot of the decks that were really good against Brit Air, but of course it's also hitting Brit Air. And I don't think Brit Air is going to be a spectacular tournament deck until we see control start to rise, and I don't think we're going to see a sudden, like, influx of control decks following this patch. I could be wrong. And of course, Brit Air is always just going to be a popular deck, so I'm not saying that nobody's going to play it, but I don't think it's going to be a particularly well-performing tournament list, even following this patch, and part of that is due to the Shark nerf. But let's not spend too much time talking about Brit Air, because we have I think cards that people are more excited to see nerfed. We have Blitz Doctrine. So Blitz Doctrine is probably the most played card of the expansion, and probably the most hated card of the expansion, I'd have to guess. Like, it's a really fun card to play. However, I think it's probably one of the most hated cards of the expansion just due to the rate at which you see it. Like, Blitz Doctrine is probably in, like, 40% of decks you play on ladder. Like, you queue into Germany, 100% chance they're playing Blitz Doctrine. You queue into US, like, 95% chance they're German ally with Blitz Doctrine. You queue into Japan, there's probably, like, a 60% chance they're German ally with Blitz Doctrine. Like, and then, of course, against Soviets, there's, like, 50% of the Soviets are Soviet-German Blitz Doctrine decks. And I've even seen a few Britain-German Blitz Doctrine decks. Like, Blitz Doctrine is just a win condition in of itself, and it's ludicrously powerful. It's probably easily the best card of the expansion. It was just too strong. So now it has been changed from, the Blitz Doctrine is being changed from 1 cost to 2 cost. And this is really big because it's going to throw off the curve quite a bit. Because oftentimes you don't really have 1-drops to play, especially if you're going first. So you just do turn 1 Blitz Doctrine, develop it, pick a possible 2-drop you want to play, like maybe a flak immediately to take out like a cavalry or a Gebirgs Pioneer or something like that. Or you might take a Stug to just play out a 2-drop. Or you might take like a 35T, not play it, and then have an extra Blitz card in your hand moving forward. And play something else on turn 2. So Blitz Doctrine was a really good card to just fit into your curve of the early game, which made it keeping it in your opening hand not terrible. Because you could play it on 1 on a turn you would otherwise be passing, and then it would give you a card to play on turn 2 99% of the time. So yeah, Blitz Doctrine going to 2 throws this off quite a bit. Because now you have to play it on turn 2, and you don't really want to be floating, like essentially passing 2 credits on turn 2 against a lot of decks. Because before, against Jago, you could oftentimes play Blitz Doctrine on 1. That was a realistic possibility that you could do, particularly if you went first. On 2, can you float 2 credits on turn 2 against Jago? Absolutely not. Can you float 2 credits on turn 2 against even just like US Frontline? Probably not. Like, it makes Blitz Doctrine harder to play on curve and much more of a tempo hit. So even if it's only 1 credit more, the turn in which you can play that is really important. So yeah, this is a particularly big nerf. Later in the game, it's not as big. 1 credit later is not huge, but it's not insignificant. So that's a good nerf to Blitz Doctrine. But then you also have a nerf to Contest Doctrine, the part 2 of the Blitz Doctrine. So the change to Contest Doctrine that we went through was from 3 cost to 4 cost. So both steps are receiving an additional cost. So it costs 2 more to play in total. And also, again, it's going to delay the turn that you can play it on. So you can't play Contest Doctrine on turn 3 anymore, unless you do War Machine. That is a pretty popular thing anyways, would be turn 1 Blitz Doctrine, turn 2 War Machine, turn 3 Contest Doctrine, and maybe a 1-drop. Or maybe just Contest Doctrine, float the credit on turn 3. You can't do that now because you, again, can't play Blitz Doctrine on turn 1. But you can still War Machine up to 4 credits on turn 3. Won't be enough to do it. So this is just hard preventing the ability to play Contest Doctrine until turn 4, which is pretty big. Again, it's also making you spend 2 extra credits. So this change to Contest Doctrine, I think, is going to be less significant than the change to Blitz Doctrine, just insofar as I think the importance of playing Blitz Doctrine on 1 is more important than the importance of playing Contest Doctrine on 3. You often wouldn't play Contest Doctrine on 3 and rather take a couple tempo plays. So obviously increasing the cost of it, period, is going to be impactful. But this is not going to throw off the curve nearly as much as the first change, but both of these changes in combination is just going to be really good. And you might be thinking, well, this like 2 nerfs seems like a lot, but some of the nerfs a lot of people were suggesting, like this was unquestionably the best card, and a lot of the nerfs people were suggesting were like, making it not stack and increasing the cost of one of the 2 options, or like making it give you the tank or Contest Doctrine and then give it the buff or the other tank. Like there were some very serious nerfs out here. So 2 credits, it keeps the feel of the card basically the same. It's just really the speed at which you can play them, and that's going to affect stuff like your ability to play 2 of them early in a game. Is you now have to sink 6 credits into each of them rather than just 4 credits. And sinking 6 credits is going to give you a much bigger tempo loss, and that should make up for the fact that you are getting +2/+2 on all of your tanks. So yeah, I think this is a very good change. I think Contest Doctrine and Blitz Doctrine are still going to see play. It's just not going to see play in every single deck anymore. Because I think, for example, US Frontline probably doesn't want this anymore. This is probably a bit too slow for US Frontline. I think just US Frontline in its more original form with Shermans and a bit of a lower curve and the double Blitzkrieg, I think it's just going to be better. Now, could you build a US-German deck with Contest Doctrine and the War Machines? Yes, I think that's still going to be fine. I just wonder now if that's going to be just objectively better than US Frontline was. Or objectively better than US Frontline like it is currently in the game prior to the balance patch. So I think we're going to see a lot of these decks sort of drop off, and certainly going to be a massive drop off in power level, and that is going to open up the game a lot, and this is going to give some potential of control decks to come back, because previously control decks would just get absolutely outvalued by Contest Doctrine decks, because the stats are way too hard to deal with, and cards like Blitz Doctrine generate 2 additional threats with a single card. So it's basically giving card draw to Germany, which is a nation that has historically lacked card draw, and then it also enables you to run stuff like 38 Ts. So it basically just created this entire deck that never runs out of stats and never runs out of cards, which made control essentially impossible to exist. With this receiving a massive nerf and probably going to see a significant drop-off in how much it sees play, I think you can have value-based control decks take a step forward in the meta again, although how far forward is going to be a big question. Let's move on, because we have another developed card that is receiving a pretty substantial nerf, which is Bomu Mafia. So, Bomu Mafia is a really... It's probably the most popular card after Blitz Doctrine. Bomu Mafia has been put into every single deck possible, and that's just because it's incredibly powerful. So previously in the game, one of the best cards in the game was Desperate Measures, which is 2 credits, deal 2 damage to all enemies, lose a credit slot. And of course, you could play that early in the game, but you didn't want to play that early in the game, because the earlier you lose a credit slot, the worse it is. But like often you'd play that by like turn, 6, turn 5, and it was like the best card in the game, unquestionably. Bomu Mafia is, you can only play it by turn 8. Sooner if you have a card like Pioneer or War Machine. However, it doesn't lose you the credit. So it's like, just on that, it's like, okay, is it better or worse than Desperate Measures? Probably a bit worse, just because of, if you need to play Desperate Measures sooner, you can. And then it also develops a US bomber, which is huge. And I don't mean huge as in, like, US bombers are insane cards. Like, most of them are pretty mediocre. I just mean it's huge as in, like, it's just giving you so much additional value. If you're playing against a control deck, you can just pick the biggest card there, and now they have to answer a massive bomber from what is otherwise air with a bunch of tiny planes, or a tank deck with a bunch of tiny tanks, and they probably are low on cards, and it's dealing burn damage plus AoE damage, and then it's generating you a massive card that sometimes might be the Suppress All bomber, because these can generate the B-24s for whatever reason. So it can give you a Suppress bomber, Suppress guard, Suppress healing, let you push face. It can give you a Blitz bomber to just push face for 6. This card is really stupid. And it is also receiving 2 nerfs. So the first nerf is it's going from 2 credits to 3 credits, which basically means you now have to reach turn 9 to play it. Because, again, if you play it on turn 8, you are going to have 5 unspent credits, which means it won't trigger the 2 damage. So you, not only is it's actually almost like a 3 nerf, because nerfing the cost of Bomu Mafia is a 2-fold nerf, because not only is it more cost to play on that turn, it's also delaying how the turn you can play it for the 2 damage, which is very powerful. But then it's also, the 2 damage is only enemy units. It doesn't hit the HQ anymore, which is also just going to be really important for getting across the line, particularly in air. I feel like uses Bomu Mafia's burn most prominently, whereas the Blitz Doctrine decks usually won on board, so the 2 damage from Bomu Mafia wasn't insignificant. You'd certainly win a couple games with it from time to time. But this is a huge hit to air, and this is a huge hit to sort of the slower version of US and the German Blitz Doctrine decks with the War Machines. So this is a massive nerf, and again, this is a massive nerf that is 100% justified, and we will still see Bomu Mafia at some point in the future. Is it going to be played in every single US ally deck anymore? I don't know. still entirely possible. Like, turn 9 for a Desperate Measures effect in a deck that otherwise has zero access to any particularly effective board clears, and it still generates a bomber. You know, if War Machine decks are still around, I think Bomu Mafia still sees play. Running Bomu Mafia without War Machine seems a little slow now, especially because there's so many downsides compared to the previous version. But I think Bomu Mafia is still a card that we are going to see an amount of play, considering it can, you know, still generate the B24s. Yeah, just absolutely crazy card. Then we get to another nerf to develop as a mechanic, and this is one that I think is going to surprise a lot of people, is it's a nerf to Yank. So Yank used to be, this battle, when you develop a card, also develop a Retribution. And sort of the big payoff of the Retribution deck is this is just going to give you near infinite value. Now, the version is, this battle, the first time you develop each turn, you can also develop a Retribution. So basically, it slows down how many times you can trigger it over the course of a game. You can't trigger it more than once a turn, and often what you'd want to do in a Yank deck is you'd collect 2, 3, 4 outrages in your hand, and then you'd play Yank, and then you start developing your outrages. This isn't a massive nerf, though, because if you're developing 1 outrage turns into 2 retribution, your hand fills up really, really fast, so you usually just want to play what you developed into. There is a couple times where you need a specific card, so maybe you need the 2k deal 5 damage retribution, and you play 1 outrage and you develop twice for it, and you don't get it. You would play a second outrage and develop twice for it. Now you can only play the second outrage and develop once for it. But that's not a huge deal. Like, this isn't a particularly substantial nerf. But it's a nerf, and I think that's odd. But I think probably the idea is just tune down the infinite value. And I think this is really happy, because I was somebody who was very skeptical of develop as a mechanic, because I was worried about just ending value as a win condition in the game if you're just going to introduce a lot of ways to infinitely develop cards. So just, even if Yank is seeing no competitive play, tuning down Yank is probably just a good change overall, because this is a card that's going to exist in your game forever, in some form or another, in some format or another. So, you know, at some point you will have a deck that can run this, and when you do, it will be a absolutely frustrating deck to play against, and this is going to tune that down slightly. Then we get to another develop change, which is the Develop Retribution, which is the 4-cost Develop 2 Retributions Retribution. And this is the source of a lot of ire, because this was the thing that let you go infinite. Because you develop 1 Retribution, and that Retribution develops you 2 Retributions, and one of those Retributions is a develop 2 Retributions, and then you just have infinite Retributions, and if you have Yank up, then, you know, the 1 Retribution develops you 2, and then that develops you 4, and then it's just absolutely insane. So one of the changes to Yank is if you play the develop 2 Retributions with Yank up, you will only develop 3 rather than 4. And that's probably like the most significant part of the Yank change. But this card is going from 4-cost develop 2 Retributions to 6-cost develop 2 Retributions. So essentially this card becomes unpickable. Sometimes you'd pick the 4-cost just because you didn't need to play Retributions that turn, but it was possible that you would need specific Retributions in the future. The 2 other options were bad, so you'd pick the 4-cost one. At 6-cost, you're really, like, you'd have to be in a situation where you have 6 credits to play, the board is empty, so you don't need to answer anything immediately, and also you have the hand space for this, and also you don't have anything better to do with 6 credits, which seems like a very specific situation. 99% of the time, you're not going to pick this Retribution anymore, and I think that's good, because again, this is the infinite value one, and infinite value through develop is just not a fun mechanic, and it's not something that is going to be healthy for the future of the game. So sort of getting ahead of this, I think, is really good. I imagine this also led to a lot of really long games, drawn-out games. If you have any, like, control deck versus Retribution or a Retribution mirror, I'm sure you had a lot of games where they just kept developing Retribution after Retribution, removing all of their units, and just not accomplishing anything. So yeah, this is a change that I was not expecting, and I don't think anyone else was really expecting, but it's a change that I'm not against. If Retribution is your favorite mechanic, I'm sorry that Retribution is taking a big hit, but it's somewhat of a unfun deck to play against. I'm sure you understand. This does surprise me just from 1939's general way they change cards, because 1939 generally takes a very long time to change unfun, unhealthy game mechanics if they aren't particularly strong. And even if they are particularly strong, it still sometimes takes them a long time to change. So, for example, Baby Combo OTK existed in the game unnerfed for years, and they never changed that. Great Patriotic War still exists as a card, and I think that's the stupidest card in the game. Same with Comet. But, like, you know, self-credit, or not self-credit denial, regular credit denial, the one with the Southern plans that you'd play on turn 2 with Observer Corps, that existed in the game for, like, over a year. And, like, as a tier 1, tier 2 deck going back and forth. Like, that was fine to exist. Like, that was horrific gameplay. Nobody enjoyed playing against that. So the fact that they immediately go for, Retribution, like the Yank and the Retribution change, shocks me, because it was not something that was performing well. Like, it was a bad deck. But the fact that they went after it immediately strikes me as odd, but I guess if you're ever gonna change it, it makes sense to change it now. Whereas, like, you know, if, like, a year and a half from now they made these nerfs, despite Retribution and Yank seeing no competitive play, it would be much more, unpalatable to the community. Whereas, like, changing it a month after it comes out, it's, like, you know, you're still gonna have people upset that their bad Retribution decks are now worse. But at least this way, it's sort of like, okay, their vision for the expansion and their vision for how these things are going to look is slightly different than the way it's played out, and that's fine. Then we get on to Japan, which is receiving 2 nerfs, and unsurprisingly, they are to the self-credit denial archetype, which already received a preemptive nerf to One Roof from 4 to 5, and I think if you have ever played with or against self-credit denial, you are happy that One Roof came out at 5, because imagine if One Roof came out at 4, but you're doing the rest of the stuff the same. Absolutely insane. So the first card that is being changed is 5th Regiment. And this does not surprise me. This would be the #1 card that I would want changed, because 5th Regiment is sort of the most common win condition for self-credit denial, in my opinion. It's not the flashiest, it's not the biggest, it's not the most consistent, in terms of, like, giving you just a free win. But, like, I feel like most of the time with self-credit denial, you win with just a large 5th Regiment, or you win with a large 5th Regiment giving you enough board advantage and forcing your opponent to dump enough resources into it that you can do anything else and win. And that's just because 5th Regiment is a stupidly strong card. Like, it needs to be answered nearly immediately, or it's going to, like, snowball out of control so quickly for a card that you can play very quickly for free. So there's a lot of nerfs that people suggested. There was some people saying that maybe you should give it an operation cost. There were some people saying that maybe you should reduce the reduction in hand to 1 to make it harder to dump out for free. And then there was, of course, what they went for, which was changing the buff it gets when you lose a credit. Now, I think this is a bit of a strong nerf. Like, I think this is a bit too far than I would have liked to see, on top of the other nerf that we're going to look at in a second. Because I thought that, like, I'm surprised they went from +2/+2 to +1/+1, which is the change, and now when you lose a credit slot, it gains +1/+1. So it goes from a 4/4 to a 5/5 to a 6/6, rather than from a 4/4 to a 6/6 to an 8/8. But I'm surprised they didn't do a +1/+2 or a +2/+1 change. Like, I'm surprised that they went for a double stat reduction on this, on top of the other nerf. So I think this might have been a little harsh. Are you still going to play 5th Regiment in self-credit denial? Unquestionably, yes. Just because the 2 cost reduction, even getting it down as a 4/4, is just going to be really, really good if you can consistently do this early in the game while losing self-credit, or while losing your own credits, and even just as a way to delay the game long enough to get to your One Roofs. That's gonna be fine. That's something you do often, is you don't even care about the stats of your 5th Regiment. It's just the fact that they exist on the board and your opponent is trading them out, or you are trading out your opponent's stuff with them for free while you're doing other stuff and setting up your big pop-off turn. So it's still going to see play, but this is a non-insignificant hit to self-credit denial as an archetype, because, again, you did win a lot of games by just getting a big 5th Regiment. And, like, either way, if it was +2/+1 or +1/+2, if it was +2/+1, you can still put your opponent under a lot of HQ pressure really quickly. If it's +1/+2, you're just getting a large unit that's it's still just as difficult for your opponent to remove, even if you're toning down how much HQ damage it can deal. +1/+1, this is a very significant nerf that makes the card a lot worse. But what's the other change? Well, the other change is to the Great Expanse. And the Great Expanse is sort of the other win condition of self-credit denial. So they went after the 2 win conditions of self-credit denial rather than any of the sort of the build-up tools. So what is the change to the Great Expanse? Well, the change to the Great Expanse, it still costs 4, but now it's only gives the units +1 attack for each slot gained rather than +1 health and +1 attack. So again, they're going after the stats, and this combined with the 5th Regiment change just makes the deck much more squishy. It makes the deck much more able to be cleared by conventional board clears. You no longer create these boards of, like, 5 8/8s that your opponent 8s to the last man or game over. And I understand this, but again, I'm shocked that they did this alongside the 5th Regiment change. This seems like a little bit of overkill, to me, personally. But, that is the change they made. And the +1 attack still means that you are going to sometimes be able to just kill from hand if you have, like, Type 94, 35T, the Great Expanse. But now it means that maybe either you have to set up for that kill from hand with the Great Expanse, or just set up a board on, like, set up a kill on, like, through the front line with the Great Expanse. Like, the Great Expanse doesn't become just a card you can throw out at the end of a combo turn where you've dumped 9 units on the board. Because, if you dump like 9 units on the board, most of them are going to have 1 health, and then your opponent plays a Bomu Mafia. And it doesn't matter that you have, like, an 11-1. Your 11-1 is going to die to Bomu Mafia just as much as a 2-1 is going to die to Bomu Mafia. Whereas previously, you would have, like, an 11-10 that is impossible for your opponent to remove. So, this is a huge nerf to the Great Expanse. And like, if you're going to nerf the Great Expanse, this is the way to do it, because if you just, like, made the card 5 credits, that's not gonna... 90% of the time you're playing the Great Expanse in a winning situation, it is to, it's on a 1 roof turn, where credits don't really matter. So nerfing the cost of the Great Expanse will not be nearly as significant. And this is a very good, like, I'm a huge fan of this change to the card. It's just odd to me that you would change this and 5th Regiment. I feel like this is a little much to me. And I think this is going to make self-credit denial. I don't know if I'd say it's drops from a tier 1 deck, because the other tier 1 decks also received pretty significant nerfs. However, I think it's definitely going to drastically decrease a lot of people's win rates on the deck. It's going to decrease everybody's win rate on the deck. But I think this is going to make the deck even more sort of unapproachable than it already is. Because already, Self-Credit Dial is a very difficult deck to pilot, and is a very difficult deck to get in, like, significant results with on a competitive level. And this is just going to increase the skill cap of the deck, and also increase the skill floor of the deck quite drastically. So I think people are still going to play it, and at the very least, it's still going to be a tier 2 deck that requires thought about, do I play this? However, I think, based on all these nerfs, we're going to see just people go back to playing regular Jaggro. Because regular Jaggro, some people were running Blitz Doctrine, but obviously you wouldn't do it now. Just go back to straight up regular old Jaggro. It received no nerfs this expansion, or this patch. Although, actually, there's one card that I'm now realizing we haven't spoken about. But yeah, they've basically received no nerfs this expansion, and Bomu Mafia has received a nerf, so every deck having access to AoE that is delayed an entire turn, and also might just reduce the number of decks running AoE. Blitz Doctrine's gone, and, well, not gone, but this Blitz Doctrine is delayed, so now you're going to have a very favorable matchup into Blitz Doctrine decks. So yeah, I think Jaggro just might be a tier 1 deck again. If it wasn't before this patch, it definitely is now. And it's really going to come down to how much air exists, because air still is always going to have, like, a go first, go second matchup against Jaggro. But yeah, I think Jaggro is probably just going to be outshine Self-Credit Denial at this point, as just kind of an objectively better deck, from a competitive point of view. And that's kind of unfortunate. because, you know, Jago's a deck that we have seen a lot of in the last couple expansions. Relatively unchanged. It has Desperate Measures again. But yeah, that's sort of where we are now. Now, here's the card that, here's the other nerf that got misplaced in the images. Germany received one other nerf, and this is the only nerf to a card not printed in this expansion. It is a second nerf to Panzer Grenadiers. So, on release, Panzer Grenadiers was a 4-cost 3/4, and then it got nerfed to a 4-cost 3/3, and it is now being nerfed to a 5-cost 3/4. So, it's regaining the health stat, but it's going from 4 to 5, and I think everybody's happy for this. This is a good nerf. This is a nerf, to be clear. A 5-cost 3/4 is much worse than a 4-cost 3/3. However, I'm glad they gave back the health. I think, you know, it makes it a little bit more tolerable. I think a 5-cost 3/3 would still probably see play in a lot of decks. Don't get me wrong. But yeah, this is a nerf. This is a nerf that they should have done like 3 patches ago. Like, they should have nerfed Panzer Grenadiers after the first Winter War balance patch, and then they didn't. And then there was the second Winter War balance patch, and they should have nerfed it harder, and they didn't. And now we get to the covert operations balance patch, and this is still one of the most played cards in the game. So I'm glad it is receiving another nerf, and it's still gonna see play at 5. But it's slower now, and this is sort of what I was talking about before when I was talking about Jagro, where Jagro was running Panzer Grenadiers. At 5, maybe you don't run Panzer Grenadiers, maybe you do. We'll have to see how slow the meta is, how fast Jagro wants to be. But there's a pretty good chance this still sees play in Jagro, and this almost certainly still sees play in stuff like US Frontline and any German mid-range deck, particularly if they're playing War Machines. So yeah, a very good change, and that brings us to the end of the nerfs. So now let's get to the handful of buffs. And if you're following, going through the nations, I don't know why Japan is before US, but why US is before Japan, I should say. There was no nerfs to Soviets, to the surprise of absolutely nobody. So let's see if maybe Soviets get some buffs. But again, the buffs are in order of the nations. So we start with Britain, which is receiving a change to Night Raid, which is a 5-cost copy a random order in the opponent's deck, add a number 10 commando to your support line. So this was one of the 2 ways to get commandos previously in the game. Originally, you had the 3 commandos you could put in the deck, and then you could have 2 Night Raids, which would give you 2 additional commandos. Covert Operations brought forward, I forget the name of the card, but it's a limited pin a unit, add a commando to your support line, and you could run 3 of those, and it costs 3, so, you know, the deck went up to 8 commandos, and then potentially even more with the Baker Street Irregulars, and Night Raid became sort of got the short end of the straw, so to say. It was just sort of the worst commando generator by far, and at 5 cost was just too power crept by everything else in the game to really even want to run in the first place. And commando decks were just going down to 6 commandos and cutting Night Raid for the most part. And commandos was one of the archetypes that was trying to be pushed in for the Covert Operations expansion, and it has it has completely and totally failed. Like, nobody is playing commandos. It's not even remotely a competitive deck. So nerfing everything else and then bringing Night Raid from 5 to 4 is going to be a step in the right direction for maybe making commandos playable. At 4 cost, I think you run Night Raid in commandos again, but it's still one of the weaker cards of commandos, and this isn't going to, like, suddenly break commandos. But yeah, it's interesting. I think this is just a good change. Night Raid at 5 was power crept probably 3 expansions ago, easily. So bringing this down to 4 is a good change. It was that or rotate the card and, you know, be sad. And then we get to a Soviet change, and this is fun. So what Soviet change are we getting? I don't even know what the best Soviet deck is at this point, because they had self-damage, and then they gutted self-damage, and then they had control, but then control got absolutely blown out of the water by Winter War with stuff like jet production, production order with the bombers, and all the suppress going around. And then they had tokens, and then they gutted tokens. So what archetype are they pushing for Soviets? Well, I don't even fully understand. Like, I guess this is a self-credit denial, or it's like a self-damage card. This could also be like an aggro tank card. Could be both. Probably will be neither. So the T-34 is a Winter War card. It's a 2-cost 2/3 tank limited that says deal 1 damage to each HQ at the start of your turn. So each HQ takes 1 damage at the start of your turn. Now it is at the end of your turn. So this will trigger immediately. Like on the turn that you play it. So you play it and it gets a guaranteed 1 damage to the enemy, 1 damage to yourself. So, you know, if you have a 34th Guards in hand, it's a guaranteed trigger. If you have a 456th on the board, it's an immediate buff. The issue is this is going up against the deck that has 4 Sickles, 4 Red Dawns, 3 Winter Warfare. You can run the, I think it's the 95th? The 2/2 deployment to deal 1 damage to an enemy unit and your HQ. You know, these are all better options than T-35. Do you want to run T-35 on top of all of that? No. So this is not a good card for self-damage, in my opinion. Is this a good card for tank aggro? I still think no. You don't want to deal damage to yourself in tank aggro. And a 2-cost, 1-op, 2/3, it doesn't look particularly good. Deal 1 damage to the enemy at the end of your turn. You kind of want to win on board and possibly with a big blitzkrieg or with a big, like, buff your tank attacks. You don't want to win through 1 damage at a time, chip damage on slow tanks that don't have blitz, don't affect the board state, and actively damage you. Yeah, this card is just still bad. This buff is entirely insignificant. I don't think this card's going to see play. Then we have a change to the 60th Cavalry Regiment, and this one's quite interesting. So the 60th Cavalry Regiment was a card that came out, I believe, in World at War, or possibly this was a skirmish card. But so the 60th Cavalry Regiment was a 4-cost 3/6 infantry with ambush. Players can only give 1 order each turn, so this affects both players. And this is a very significant change, and this was, this is a very significant effect that changes the way the game is played, and this was one of my favorite cards. I've tried to make this card work on several occasions in several different decks, and the issue is Sickle is one of the best Soviet orders in the game, and 60th Cavalry Regiment makes Sickle terrible because it means either you can't play 2 Sickles on a turn, or you can't play a Sickle and then any other order in your deck on a turn, and those are often things you want to do. Like, often you want to play Sickle and then play a board clear. Or play a board clear and then Sickle. Or you want to, like, play Sickle to draw, and you draw into an order you want to play. The 60th Cavalry just hurt Soviets too much, and Soviets did not have the effective cards to build a low-order, high-unit deck. That just wasn't good, and then, you know, over the years, Soviets have just gotten better and better orders, which just makes 60th Cavalry worse and worse and worse. The other issue is you play 60th Cavalry, and then your opponent plays Honorable Death, and then plays more orders. And you are now down a massive tempo loss without actually doing anything. Or you play 60th Cavalry, and your opponent goes entirely face, because this doesn't have Guard. You know, if they just changed Ambush to Guard, I think this card would see a lot of play. I know for a fact I would play this card. If you just put Guard instead of Ambush, I think this card gets really interesting and sees a lot of play, but that's not how they changed it. Instead, it's gone from 4-cost to 2, and it's gone from a 3/6 to a 2/4. I don't know why they don't have the red box around the attack. And it has lost Ambush, but the effect is the same. So it's a 2-cost 2/4 infantry that makes both players only able to play 1 order each turn. And this is absolutely terrible. I don't really understand what deck this is trying to be played in. Like, as a 2-cost 2/4, this is not going to be played in Control whatsoever. There's way better, like, this is miles worse than Bryansk. And this is also probably worse than 845th, because the 845th heals you, whereas this doesn't. So you know, it doesn't have Blitz, it doesn't have Guard, it doesn't heal. This card is just bad in Control. They somehow made this card worse in Control. And now, of course, you could say that, you know, you run this in an aggro deck. It's cheap, it has decent stats for a 2-drop, and it's going to prevent your opponent from doing stuff. You know, it prevents your opponent from playing an order and then playing wave after wave for the 4 damage. And that's true, but what aggro Soviet deck or aggro Soviet ally deck runs few orders, wants to stop opponents' orders, and is willing to play a 2-cost 2/4 infantry do nothing? I don't know. I genuinely do not know what deck is supposed to play this, and what decks this is supposed to be good against, because it's coming down on two. What decks are playing multiple orders on, like, turn 3 or turn 4? I genuinely don't know what this is supposed to do. I guess there's a world where you could play this in a German main Soviet ally aggro tank deck where your only orders are like Blitzkrieg, Enigma, and combined arms off of Panzer Grenadiers, something like that. And you play 60th Cavalry, it triggers 35 Ts, it's a high health unit that you can push to the front line for a Blitzkrieg. But again, you would only do that if this card's effect is useful, and I don't see this card's effect being useful early in the game. And that's when you're playing this, because later in the game it's going to be really easy to remove a 2/4. So, yeah, I think they very easily could have changed this card into a playable and interesting card that helps Soviets, and they didn't. So I think this card's terrible, I think this card's terrible, and then we have the last change of this expansion is not Soviets. It is Italian, and it's changing La Decima. So if you might not recognize La Decima, if you play recently, but La Decima used to be a really popular card. Sort of when it was released and announced, people thought it was really bad, because why would you pay 8 cost for a 2/4 ambush guard? That's really bad stats. And destroy target in the support line is not like an amazing effect for 8 cost. People thought this card was going to be really bad, but then it was played a lot, and then it sort of fell off. Not because La Decima got really bad, although it did get power creeped ridiculously hard by Naval Engagement. Naval Engagement is an insane card and much better than La Decima. But honestly, La Decima fell off because they nerfed Mare Nostrum, which was the reason people were playing Italy Ally, and when people stopped playing Italy Ally, they stopped playing La Decima. So now they're trying to bring people back to Italy Ally without Mare Nostrum. Well, Mare Nostrum still technically exists in the game, but just not remotely how it used to work. So this is their push for control. This is sort of the only really visible, like, control change. This is the only change in this expansion, or sorry, in this patch that pushes control in any way. And it's La Decima, and I really like it goes from 8 cost 2/4 to a 7 cost 2/5. That's a huge change. This card is insane, but is this card insane enough? I don't know. I don't really see. I don't like this change. I really don't like this change. This card is insane. Like, they have power crafted this card ludicrously hard. Either one of these changes on its own would be a significant change to a card that has already seen a lot of play, but doing both of these changes is just making this one card absolutely insane. But also, it's the type of card that, even if it is absolutely insane, it's not going to be good in a lot of matchups. And does Italy Ally or any control deck have the tools to survive in the matchups where this isn't good in? I don't think so. So you're just basically making a card that's really, really good in specific matchups, so either nobody plays it and the change is meaningless, or some people play it, and it is going to hard counter decks that are already weak in the meta, or nobody plays it now, but it's played in the future, and it's going to be an absolutely insane card, and once control becomes playable, it's just going to be Italy Ally versus Italy Ally, and everybody's running 2 Decimas and Naval Engagements, and the world sucks. So yeah, I hate this change. This change is meaningless. This change is meaningless. This is a good change. This is a good change. This is a good change. I don't understand why they did these, both of them, but individually they're fine changes. These 2 changes I don't have a strong opinion on. They're somewhat surprising, but whatever. This is a good change. 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 So most of the nerfs I'm very happy with. This is sort of the only one. The buffs really hit the mark. If you told me they are buffing 4 cards this expansion, or this patch, I would be shocked that it's that low, but I'd be interested to see what they went for. And if you told me one of them was Night Raid, I wouldn't be surprised. And if you told me one of them was British, I'd assume that it was some sort of buff to commandos. Then if you told me 2 of them were Soviets, I would assume that, well, you're probably not buffing a token card, because tokens cards are really, really good. They just don't have enough of them at the moment. So I would assume that you're buffing either 2 Soviet control cards, or you're buffing a Soviet control card and a Soviet tank card, or maybe a Soviet control card and a self-damage card. Like maybe you maybe you reduce the cost on 34th guides again because you realize that self-damage has been kind of power crept. If you told me the 2 Soviet changes were 2 just bad cards and to support a non-existing archetype, well, honestly, that's on brand for 1934 or 1939. So, you know, whatever. And then Ledechima, and they really, really messed up the buffs in this patch, but the nerfs were well placed. So I don't think the buffs are going to have an immediate effect on the meta. I think the meta is still going to be good at the moment, as long as you don't like playing Soviets. And yeah, that is sort of it for me on this one. I think in the future, the sort of the decks that are going to come out of the ashes of this patch are going to be Brit Air is still going to be a very popular deck, and probably marginally better than it used to be. I think Jagro is going to be probably the best deck, I would assume, some version of Jagro. And I think US-German is going to be good. German-US with War Machines is going to be played. I think it's going to be tier 2, though. And Soviets will continue to have only, like, fringe decks. And to be clear, I think there's some very interesting and powerful things you can do with Soviets. Respite is one of the best cards of the expansion. It's just, you're very fringe and easy to counter. So yeah, that is going to be it for me for this one. Let me know what you think of these balance patches in the comments, or join my Discord to continue the discussion there. You know, subscribe if you haven't already, share the video, like, comment, YouTube algorithm things. If you are able to and interested in, I have a link to donations in the comments, so feel free to do that if you are able to. And thank you very much to everybody who has already done that. It means a lot to me, and it helps out quite a bit. So, thank you very much for watching, everybody, and I will catch all of y'all in the next one.